life in 2023 looking quite different than in previous years, Danielle and I once again decided to hit the road and head back to Europe. This year's destination, Paris, France. Let's take a look back at our travels and the Paris Marathon. Danielle and I have made a habit over the past handful of years of planning our vacations around our running, and in 2023, the trip to Paris was really no different. In fact, the reason we picked Paris as our destination to begin with started way back in mid-2022 when we applied for and did not get into the 2023 London Marathon, which was to be run in late April. Having both checked off the Chicago and Berlin marathons, which are two of the 6 world marathon major races, with London being another one of the majors, we were looking for a spring race to travel to. When we didn't get into London, we decided that we still wanted to travel somewhere abroad around the same time of year, and we found the Paris Marathon perfectly timed for early April. Race week started on Monday by picking my parents up at DIA, who were staying at our house for the week to watch Nelly, and then the next day we were off. We flew from Denver to Salt Lake City, and then after a short layover, we left for Charles de Gaulle International Airport. Now, as is normal for us when we fly international, Danielle slept like a baby, whereas I was awake for the entire 10-hour flight. We typically fly Southwest Airlines when we fly domestically in the States, but after flying in the Delta Comfort Plus cabin, we can now understand the perks of other airlines. After getting our bags and getting through customs, we took the 45-minute train ride into the heart of Paris. And after a short walk, we got to our hotel room to find out that we had been upgraded. We had heard that essentially every hotel room in Paris is tiny, so it wasn't a shock to us when we found that our room had essentially only enough room for the bed and not much more. So that wasn't exactly the upgraded part. What was the upgrade came in the form of views, and boy did it have views. From our Juliet balconies, we had unimpeded views of the Eiffel Tower that were worth every second of the 18 hours of travel. After unpacking and staring at the Eiffel Tower for a while, we decided it was time for us to set out on a shakeout run to loosen up the legs from the full day of travel. We made our way from the hotel through the Trocadero, had our first close-up view of the Eiffel Tower, and joined plenty of other runners along the Seine River for what became our first sightseeing experience. After a short and easy 5K, we walked through the 7th arrondissement where we saw the Hotel des Invalides, the Musée d'Orsay, the Grand Palais, and then we had our first introduction to what we think is Paris's greatest trait, what we called cafe culture. Throughout the duration of our trip, we basically only ate inside on a handful of occasions, and instead opted to sit on the streets at the tiny little tables that allowed for soaking up the environment. Now, we recognize that everywhere across the world has patio seating available, especially in this post-pandemic era, but the Parisian cafe culture has a different flair than what we'd seen elsewhere. Its focus is not solely on the meal, but it's about embracing the ambiance and slow-moving pace of the meal, and about your time conversing with the person that you're with, while you're still able to watch the fast-moving, bustling city passing around you. There's a ceremonial feeling associated with sitting at your table on the streets that we really hadn't felt elsewhere. Each cafe we experienced had a few standard items: extremely friendly staff who spoke varying degrees of English, an excess of cheeses and wines, and bread for days. Bread was everywhere in the city. We could consistently see people walking down the streets eating nothing but a French baguette. It was a carb-loading paradise. After our first cafe culture experience, we started to walk back in the direction of our hotel. This was the first time walking through the streets of Paris when we experienced what we'd consider to be a cousin of the cafe culture, the boulangeries. These are essentially artisan bread and pastry shops, but they have an extravagance to them that feels quite similar to when you were a kid walking into a high-end Christmas toy shop. Despite just eating, we knew we couldn't pass up on some crepes and pastries and sitting on the lawn of the Eiffel Tower for a picnic. We made our way back to the hotel to freshen up, and then made the short walk to the famous Champs-Élysées, known for its amazing shopping, famous residents, and the Arc de Triomphe. Danielle already knew what shoes she was going to wear for the marathon, but I was between two shoes that I had trained in, the Nike Vaporfly 2s and the Adidas Adios Pro 3s, both of which I loved. What I wasn't ready for was when we were walking along the Champs-Élysées, we popped into the Nike store, and sure enough, there were the not yet released in the US Vaporfly 3s. While I'd love to say I had the self-control to not pick up a pair, I most certainly bought them. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to buy these, and my marathon shoe debate was now over. How we were still hungry at this point, we still don't know. But after yet another amazing cafe culture meal on the Champs-Élysées with the Arc de Triomphe in plain view, we finally made our way back to the hotel for yet another amazing surprise. Thursday morning, we woke up at around 7 a.m., surprisingly rested. I was able to get a quick shakeout run in, and we then took the train east to the Palais Royal Musée du Louvre station for, as you guessed it, a trip to the Louvre. Our reserved time to enter wasn't until 11:30 a.m., so we stopped for some croissants and coffee beforehand, and then walked through the gardens before making our way to the glass pyramids. We started in the Denon Wing, which houses thousands of neoclassical European art, and like most others making their first trip to the Louvre, our highest priority was to see Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. The crowds of people in the room were noteworthy, but like seeing da Vinci's David in Florence, it's understood why that is when you see her. If you visit the Louvre and focus solely on that 2.5 by 2 foot painting, however, you most certainly will miss out on the scale of the pieces in the rest of the Denon Wing. In Mona Lisa's own room, it's easy to be sucked into the gravitational pull of that one piece and not turn around and see such masterpieces as the Wedding of Cana, or even in the adjacent halls, the Coronation of Napoleon and Liberty Leading the People. While walking through the rooms, don't forget to take the time to look up. The ceilings are magnificent works of art in their own right. In the adjoining room atop marble staircases, you walk past the overpowering Winged Victory and then are led to the Galerie d'Apollon, which houses, among other items, the remaining pieces of the French crown jewels. This might be the most expensive room I've ever set foot in my life. Making our way from the Denon Wing to the Sully Wing took us even further back in time, from the neoclassical European artwork to that of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian antiquities. While some items rightfully were behind glass, we were extremely surprised to find that there were a notable number of pieces of priceless artwork from the antiquities that were simply laid out in rooms within arm's reach. Being the rule followers that we are, and out of simple respect for the museum and for history, we didn't touch a single piece, but the fact that they are open for all to see is pretty eye-opening. My personal highlight of this section of the museum was, among the many others, a capstone which once rested on the top of an Egyptian pyramid. From there we returned through the corridors housing first the Hellenistic Greek statues, including the Athena of Velletri, Hermes untying his sandal, and finally the famed Venus de Milo. As you walk through this magnificent room with the ancient statues at slightly higher than eye level, but without any barriers between you and them, you feel as though you're walking with them, almost hand in hand. Our final room was that of the statues of the ancient Roman emperors. Unlike the room of Greek statues, in this room they're elevated a little bit higher than you, imposing an authoritarian state, as though they were still ruling the room today. While we had to be judicious with our time, the Louvre is a sight unlike any that we've ever seen. And with over 2 hours spent in the museum, we feel as though we only scratched the surface of what its walls hold. We'll definitely be coming back here someday. After leaving the Louvre, we took in cafe culture some more and then made our way south to the Paris Marathon Expo to pick up our bibs. One unique feature of races in France is that they require you to submit a medical certificate from a licensed physician stating that you are physically fit for running. We had submitted our certificates online well beforehand, which allowed for a smooth pickup process. While the overall size of the expo, specifically the official ASICS race merchandise area, felt quite a bit smaller compared to some of the others that we've been to, Chicago and Berlin in particular, it still conveyed a scale of importance that put them on level with the other world marathon majors. With 50,000 runners from over 140 countries taking part in the race, this was when Danielle and I both felt our first sense of adrenaline around it being almost race day. After this, of course, Danielle let me peruse all of the shoe displays like a kid in a candy store. A word of advice, we strongly advise going to a race expo of this size as early as possible. We stood in line for no more than 5 minutes overall. However, there are reports from others that went to the expo on Saturday of waiting up to 2 hours just to get in the building. To wrap up the day, we went back to the hotel, and with some jet lag still kicking in, we did some cafe culture near our house, and then we went to bed knowing we had more sightseeing tomorrow. With the marathon right around the corner and both of us having goals of PRs, we went into Friday and Saturday with a plan of being much more low-key in an effort to conserve energy. In addition to being in the midst of our running taper, we had each taken on one of the more aggressive carb loading regimens we'd ever done for a race. On Thursday, we started using Megan Featherstone's carb loading protocols from her website's carb calculator, which had me taking in a whopping 665 grams of carbs per day for a 3-day period, and Danielle needing 520 grams over the 3-day period. But as we've mentioned, if there's ever a city to carb load in, it's Paris. Where initially we were so caught off guard by people walking around eating baguettes, we now use that culture to our benefit. Every meal we had, when walking around snacking, even the drinks that we carried around, all of them were filled with bread and other carby things. That said, after only 1 day of aggressive carb loading, by Thursday morning all we wanted was fresh fruit. That's not to say we didn't still load up with bread and croissants as well, we most certainly did. We just learned that we needed to add some variety in there with it. We hopped on the train once again, this time jumping to the Hotel de Ville. The architecture was breathtaking. It was quintessential old world Europe. It was inspiring seeing glimpses of the upcoming 2024 Olympics. Throughout the city, we saw the preparations already underway for the world's eyes to be gathered in Paris. There were statues and pieces of art throughout the city being painted gold. In fact, when we were walking around the grounds of the Louvre the day before, we walked by Napoleon's Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel, which looks directly at the glass pyramids, and there we saw the disassembled statues being prepped for transport to get cleaned up for their big event. The first stop from the Hotel de Ville took us to the Île Saint-Louis and the Île de la Cité, the two islands in the middle of the Seine. The most prominent feature of the two isles could not be missed, the Notre Dame Cathedral, specifically the construction to rehabilitate the magnificent church. Having been damaged by fire in April 2019, the reconstruction continues to be underway with the goal of completion in time for the Olympics next year. While obviously closed to tourists, this didn't stop the people from flocking to the site. Despite not being open, it is yet another marvelous sight in a city of extravagance. Following more cafe culture for wine, cheese, and more carbs, we set off for the Latin Quarter. While on this day we opted against any tours, we instead took in the ambiance of the 5th arrondissement, including the medical school, the National Museum to the Middle Ages, the Université Paris-Sorbonne, and the Pantheon, which is a burial site of distinguished French citizens such as Voltaire, Victor Hugo, and Marie Curie. Of all the places in Paris that we visited, we agreed that, while as ornate as it may be, the Latin Quarter felt the most like a locals-only, livable neighborhood. Danielle and I have on multiple occasions overdone our day preceding a race while traveling, so on Saturday, the day before the marathon, we chose to stay much closer to our hotel in the 16th. We still got one final shakeout run in, and again took in plenty of cafe culture, as one does in Paris, and then we simply relaxed. That's not to say that we didn't take in some more of the Parisian sights, and somehow still we took in more food. Now carb-loaded and rested, we were ready for Sunday. Race day started with a 5 a.m. wake-up call, but by the time the alarms went off, we were both more than ready to get up and moving. We aren't sure how, but we were both able to sleep far better than we normally do the night before a big race. We'll chalk that up to the excess of carbs we were well fueled with. Our hotel in the 16th arrondissement near the Trocadero was perfect for race day. We made the 10-minute walk from the hotel to the finishing area where the bag drop was, past the Arc de Triomphe, and down the Champs-Élysées to the starting corrals. About 5 minutes before the starting gun, the light drizzle came to a stop, and from then on the weather was absolutely ideal for a marathon for the rest of the day. It was overcast and right on the brink of chilly, but not cold enough to be bothersome. You can't draw up better weather for an A race than this. My previous marathon PR was just under 4 hours, but for Paris I had put in a better training block than ever before, so I had set my goal for sub 3:30. Danielle, only 9 months out from the birth of Nellie, had set her A goal at running a sub 4-hour marathon, which would also be a PR for her. We got into our respective corrals, shed our drop layers, and settled in for the big event. Having been in the starting corrals for other larger marathons in the past, we both agreed that the Paris Marathon's scale and energy were right up there with any that we've experienced. The energy in the corrals was electric. The race starts off on a downhill stretch of cobblestone, and within the first 2 kilometers you're taken around the Place de la Concorde, setting the stage for the museum of the city that you're about to run through over the next 40K. The course then takes you directly through the gardens of the Louvre and then past the Hotel de Ville. Passing through our first large park, the Bois de Vincennes, gets you to the half marathon mark, where you're now heading west, back into the city center. A little before reaching the Notre Dame Cathedral, the course shifts from the residential roads and drops down to the roads alongside the Seine River. For the next 4 miles, the course loops around the town where the city's most iconic landmark serves as a constant reminder of the magnitude of the event. While the city and its contents have an overwhelming elegance, this was whimsically counterbalanced in multiple strobe light and EDM music-filled tunnels. It was a reminder of Europe's beautiful balance of the classic old world and modern youthfulness. We passed the Eiffel Tower around mile 20, and with only about 10K left, I felt stronger and more confident than ever. At this point, I knew a sub 3:30 marathon was going to happen, but now I felt confident enough to shift my goal to a sub 3:20. I knew this would be tight, but it was possibly doable. After passing Roland Garros, you reach the second large city park of the race. There's a notable hill immediately as you reach the park, but with the combination of the crowd, my training, my commitment to my pre- and in-race nutrition, and the knowledge of a pending PR, this was more than enough to push me up the hill. We reached the Trocadero at the top of the climb, and then the crowds and the energy only amplified. I don't have much bad to say about this race. In fact, I loved almost every aspect of it. However, this area was the only place where I felt that the crowds became a little too cramped for the runners, creating almost a bottleneck feeling for just a brief period. But you know, if 20 seconds of an energetic crowd is the only complaint, then that makes for an amazing experience. Now we were past the Trocadero and I was on a mission. As the route crested and turned downhill for the finish line, the crowd only continued to amp up their energy and the runners were able to feed off of it. There was one more big roundabout at the Place de Victor Hugo, down the Avenue Bougard,
and then another sharp right-hand turn down the Avenue Foch, and it was a true sprint down the final 0.1 miles with the Arc de Triomphe in plain view. I crossed the finish line and I looked at my watch and I saw that I finished in 3 hours, 19 minutes, and 54 seconds. I immediately texted Danielle, who quickly responded by telling me that she was also well in pace for a sub 4 hour PR. I wasn't about to leave the finishing corral knowing that she was right behind me. It didn't take long for her to get there, crossing the finish line with her own new PR of 3:54:22. Having our hotel so close to the starting and finishing lines once again paid off by being able to meander our way back, take a quick shower, and then we were able to walk right back near the Trocadero for some cheese and bread, some wine and champagne, and then some spectating of more runners while we were able to recap our brand new personal records. Later that night, Danielle surprised me with another unbelievable Parisian experience. Dinner not looking at the Eiffel Tower, but inside of it. There's an old saying that you can either have the view or you can be the view, and this is an experience of a dinner that is well worth taking some time to get away from the cafe culture we've done so often and go full-on tourist dinner. The food and wine were good for sure, but the real draw is just knowing that you're eating in one of the most iconic locations in the world. We both agreed that this isn't something that we would do with any regularity, but it's absolutely worth doing if you're a tourist in Paris. Our trip wrapped up the next day, but knowing that there was a full day of travel ahead, we opted to take a slightly later flight so we wouldn't have to have another early wake-up call. We did one last cafe culture meal, we took in a little more time relaxing in the hotel spa, and then we hopped on the train back to De Gaulle. As both weary travelers and extra weary racers, this time we were both able to sleep on the flight back. After a short layover in Seattle, we finally made it back home to Denver. Getting home after a trip, knowing you've made lifelong memories, experiences, and in this case, personal records, is often rewarding in its own right, but this time it was extra special. If we were able to motivate Nellie to know for the rest of her life that the world is smaller than we once realized and that it's absolutely worth exploring, we hope she will be able to have a more enriched life than any material thing we could ever give to her. For us, Paris was more than just a city to explore. It was a goal worth working for and sweating for. If you're considering running, do it. If you're considering running the Paris Marathon, don't hesitate to do it. It's a great race. And if you're considering traveling, absolutely do it. We are choosing to be young while we can, and more than anything, we hope that we're inspiring others to do the same.